Net Radio, powerful radio. Join me to hear knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Tuesdays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. here on NewEra TT Radio, Net Radio.
Welcome to DriveTime Exchange. As rubber hits the road, hard talk meets great music. Monday to Thursday, 4 to 6 p.m. on Net Radio, taking you above and beyond.
Yes, it is party time. Out of that time, but still into some times now. We have a good afternoon to you, and of course, welcome to NewEra TT Radio as we take you above and beyond the heartbeat of the Caribbean. And of course, we welcome everybody to the DriveTime Exchange. Of course, in between this session, we are led by none other than journalist extraordinaire, Mr. Tony Fraser. So, Tony, great afternoon to you. How are you doing?
I am good, man, and I really love your selection this afternoon. So I have to call you Selector Extraordinaire.
Yes, Selector.
I think I particularly like this piece. I think it's one of the best songs of the election development and campaigning and so on. He captured quite a lot of the spirit in the campaign. That was 86 or 81, one of the two of them. And I think it was 86 he was talking about Robbie the DJ mixing up all of the parties and so on. Wonderful selection. And we are going to talk about that in a different kind of way, but still related to it this afternoon. We are going to observe, first of all, is that the small parties, and that is not an indictment against them. Maybe the indictment will come when I challenge them to ask them why they haven't become big parties. But that's another story. I sort of looked at the political party scene, and we have, been as a society, and if and everybody can cast their minds back 40, 50, 60 years. We've been walking down the two-party road system. The UNC has changed its name on a number of occasions, but essentially it's the same party representative of a constituency. And in between, there have been coalitions. And over the decades, even after an election, even after 6 months, 8 months of an election, even after, 33-3 of the NER in 1986, representative of a whole lot of people casting their vote with a new party, a coalition made up of a lot of parties which, had been hanging around for quite some time. And the point is that within 2 years, if my memory serves me right, the party started to fracture, and the small parties left or were pushed out, and all of that. In 2010, um, some of the same things happened, and we have one of those persons here this afternoon who was part of that movement, including incidentally, the labor movement has grouped with the UNC or whatever you want to call it on different occasions, searching for a formula to represent. And on the other hand, you think of what 33% of the electorate remains outside of the whole business of voting, and I don't want to stress on the size of that figure because I don't know any society unless you are a forced society that everybody votes. So to say that 33%, uh, do not like what is happening will be a little bit of an exaggeration. But nevertheless, people have demonstrated in all kinds of ways that they are not happy with the two major political parties, the People's National Movement, which has been consistent and solid over the years, 56 to the present time, 55 if you like it. The UNC of today has gone through different formulations over the period of time, going back to the PDP, Badisagan Maraj, and different, uh, you know, generations of the party. And in spite of the electorate moving at times from one party to the other after the other one has been given the government, or in the instance of the recent times when 150,000 supporters of the PNM, or put it another way, 150,000 people who voted for the PNM in 2015 departed in 20 or 25. So I am saying that notwithstanding the obvious disenchantment towards the political parties when they get into government, the parties on the side um, have not utilized that, in my opinion, this is what I'm charging them for, utilized that disenchantment effectively. Yes, they have come together with each other and with one of the UNC, but they have not those coalitions, associations, however you want to term them, have not lasted very long. So this afternoon, I have gathered a few of them, four of them, representative, each one representative of a small party over the period of time. We have Timothy Hamel-Smith, who is the political leader of Hope, Honesty, Opportunity, Performance, and Empowerment. I hope I got that right. Thanks, Timothy, for being with us. David Abdullah, who has been in the politics for a long time, going back to the 1970s, the ULF, and a number of parties coming up over the years. He's a political leader of the Movement for Social Justice. Thanks, David, for accepting the invitation. Imran Ali, who is a relative newcomer compared to the others, he is the political leader of leadership. His political leadership sitting that he will represent the party in a distinguished position that I would like to say, Imran Ali. And Steve Alvarez, who is the political leader of the Democratic Party of Trinidad. And to be truthfully started with Steve, I exchange emails with him every now and again when he sends me the emails about this or that in the politics. And, said, Steve, why you fellas can't, structure and put in place political parties that can gather significant support. So, Steve, I started off with you, and I give you the opportunity to make your first statement. Essentially, the question that I have started with is the question that I have for you.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. The problem that we have in Trinidad and Tobago is not that the political party hasn't actually done a great job in terms of representation, in terms of coming to with a good idea of where we need to be. But the real problem is that most of these smaller parties, as we would want to call them, don't have an inherent base. Apart from the labor movement, which has, in general, the labor support, but you don't have that sort of cohesion within the labor movement to say, well, we follow one political party, we support one political party. In Trinidad and Tobago, our politics, for whatever reason, seem to be always based on race. So no matter how good your vision is, how good your plan is, how well organized you are, and in some instances how much money you spend, you are always coming up against the loyalty to race. And that not only affects the party's ability to make a dent in the politics, but more importantly, it creates a tremendous problem in coming up with solutions that affect the country. So that, for example, now that you're going around and you're seeing so many opportunities for development, and you're seeing areas where perhaps the government is not doing as much as they could, you can say what you want. There will always be one sector who would say they're the best government ever, and another sector that says they're the worst government ever. So there's never really a debate or conversation about what's best for our country. And I think that's where we have the problems with the small parties, because the conversation doesn't get to that level.
All right, let's go this way. Timothy Hamel-Smith, what Steve, I hear him saying is that the electorate is unyielding to whatever overtures that the small parties make, because the two major ethnic groups have locked up the two parties and the electorate in one. Your response?
Yeah, so thank you for having me, Tony. It's a delight to be here. One of the things I think that really the problem that you're facing is not just because Steve points to the race-based sort of party collective that people can depend on having a core base because of their attraction to a particular racial grouping. I think that the real underlying problem is the electoral system. So that if you have an electoral system which is structured so as to lock out the possibility of small parties, it has its own, when people realize after, a number of attempts, 1981, ONR, COP in 2007, when they realized, look, these parties have gained 23% of the vote, but no seats. Eventually, they decide, look, this is not, I'd rather not vote or put my vote with a party that I feel might win the election. And that's an understandable behavior. But I'm saying that if in fact you want, if third parties are to thrive, you really need to find that the electoral system changes. And that was recommended way back in 75 by Hugh Wooden in that electoral commission, where he proposed a mixed form of first past the post and proportional representation. And that allows for the potential for small parties to gather sufficient numbers to win 1, 2, 3 seats or whatever it may be, in order to have some voice in the parliament, and therefore that their plans, their policies might be heard at a greater level. And that allows, what it allows for, of course, is real coalition parties post an election. Because if neither party, neither of the other two major parties have won sufficient seats to have a majority, then they have to approach these small parties, and you can really then have a negotiation taking place. And when I say negotiation, not in terms of people, not in terms of posts and positions, but these are the policies I see that would make a difference in Trinidad and Tobago. And if you will accept that you will adopt these and I will adopt yours and support yours, then I think you have something far better than you have today, where really what you have is both parties practically coming to the table with very little plan as to how they intend to have the next 5 years emerge so that Trinidad and Tobago can prosper and succeed and be better than it is when it started off. And until that time, it's going to be very difficult for small parties. Of course, you could have pre-election coalitions, but the truth is, as I think it would be admitted by David, that once you're this, all you count for is 2 out of 26 or 29 or whatever. Well, if you want to leave, leave. You do not have that influence that you could otherwise have had if you had a post-election coalition.
Okay. All right, so we go to Imran Ali, and Imran Ali is the deputy political leader of the COP, Congress of the People. And if there is one of the small parties that has done best over the years, at least in one election, it was the COP. Of course, the COP was not an original party as such. It came out of the original coalition. If you like, it comes out of, you have to track it back to the ONR and so on. So, but it is here now, and that opportunity when it won, I don't remember, 6, 8 seats or so, that opportunity has passed, and the COP has really not been able to make an impression on the electorate since then. Why, Imran?
Well, first off, thanks for having me, and good day to the panel, all familiar faces. That is a very long answer I have to give Mr. Fraser. But we're looking at a formula for the smaller parties to be able to, as Mr. Alvarez put it, grow a base. Right? So we're starting off with the issue of to have a base. The COP had what I would term a charismatic leader in 2007. Well, 2006 to 2007, when they started. People believed in the ideology of Mr. Dukaran's new politics, which is how he termed it, right? And that ideology resonated with a lot of people, which enabled us to get the 140,000 plus votes in 2007, but not a seat. To answer your question, why we haven't been able to build on the seats that we would have gotten in 2010, a number of factors. The base being one, the COP being born out of the conflict with the UNC. You had some members returning. Differences in opinions moving forward. As Mr. Hamel-Smith was there, he would know. And generally, the ability to attract the resources required to build and sustain a party. I mean, both Mr. Alvarez and Mr. Hamel-Smith hit the nail on the head in terms of the different factors required. But the resources is something that big parties spend big money, and it's big business. The smaller parties don't have the ability to attract or spend the resources required. And slowly over time, we got a whittling down to the point now that the COP, yes, we are in the current coalition, but our attempts to rebuild and grow the party back to where it would have been and beyond has proven to be very difficult given the state of play at the moment. So that's the short version.
All right. So you're talking about resources as one of the major factors. the inability of the small party, the COP, to attract the kind of resources that are required for campaigning and for the sustenance of the party over a period of time. David Abdullah has probably been in more parties and coalitions, more than the three others in this group, going back to, if I'm correct, David, going back to the ULF in the 1970s. And so you've had the experience, you've been trying to remember, yes, you were senator in the party of 2010, when the party of 2010 won, and won by a significant margin, but was not able to hold it together. And so the small parties have dropped out of that big party, NJAC, etc., etc. What have been the factors that have prevented the small parties from gaining the kind of support base that is required, which will attract sponsorship and so on effectively? Because clearly businessmen are not putting their money in parties which they don't think will survive.
Yeah, thanks, Tony, and good afternoon, guys, and to all who are tuned in. Let me quote or refer to two persons, of course, who have passed on. Lloyd Best always made the point about culture, the political culture, and he asked, posed the question: how does a culture escape from itself? And both Steve and Timothy have referred to aspects of the culture. Imran to another one. One aspect of the culture, of course, is the politics of ethnicity. So it's not only race, it is also religion and geography. Tobago is different from Trinidad and so on. And then there's a culture of money, big money, which was introduced by the ONR in 1981. When I contested in 76 for the ULF, we must have spent, $2,000 and $3,000 in that campaign, right? People who went into the polling stations as our agents never got paid. It was all voluntaries because they wanted to contribute to the success of the party. There was a simple meal and a soft drink and so on that they got. So that has all changed. You want canvassers, you have to pay people to canvass, you have to provide transport for people on election day, provide money, and then the advertisements, of course, the restrictions on how much a candidate could spend for election of whatever it is, $50,000 is a joke, because the party itself spends, tens of millions of dollars on advertising in the media, etc. And on the big rallies, the stages, the entertainment, and busing people in. So there's a culture of money, and there's a culture on the ground too, if we want to be honest, that there's transactions, so that people expect to get money, particularly those who are unemployed and on hard times, expect to get something. What you're running, what you have for WeBoss, right? And the traditional parties. I want to talk to them not as the two big parties. I want to talk to them as the traditional parties, because they have maintained the status quo of the system. And now I switch to of that political culture of money and ethnicity in the politics. But I then want to talk about the maintaining the status quo that was referred to by Brinsley Samaru as established by the British colonial from way back then. So wherever the British were, whether it is in Trinidad and Tobago, or in Guyana, Jamaica, Barbados, or in East Africa, West Africa, wherever the British were, they sought always to create the political environment where the working classes or the working people will be divided. In Jamaica, it's not by race, but there's a tribal politics of JLP versus PMP and so on, which I know well, having grown up in Jamaica. Here it is race and religion and other things. And that divide and rule has enabled the status quo of who owns and controls economic power to remain essentially intact. And so the political people control political power are the enablers, and that's why I call them the traditional parties, are the enablers of the status quo of the system. And so I would like to refer to us more as non-traditional parties seeking to break that political culture, but it is not easy to break that culture for many of the reasons that have been already articulated by colleagues on the panel.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to introduce something into, I buy most of what has been said, or all of what has been said, but I think there is another element that happens, which is really administrative incapacity, inability. 4 years goes by. 4 years go by, and there is nothing happening in terms of the small parties, non-traditional, however you want to refer to it. And 6 months, perhaps 3 months before the election, there is a whole rush to everybody who wants to amalgamate with the other one, which tells me, and probably tells the electorate also, is that administratively, these small parties, non-traditional parties, we can use them interchangeably. I have no argument with that. Really don't have the capacity to govern. They want to come with a quick fix at the last moment to grab the power, and it doesn't work.
Well, all right. So you didn't ask who to respond. So let me just say that I don't include the MSJ in terms of that. After the 2020 general elections, we contested 5 seats. Of course, we all lost badly and so on. But we immediately pivoted and started Tuesday Talk with the MSJ. And virtually every week, we may miss 1 or 2 here and there, but every week for the last 5 and more years, we've been doing Tuesday Talk with the MSJ, which you know, Tony, because you're on our media list. And so you get both the information prior to and the cloud recording subsequently. The traditional media does pick it up from time to time and rebroadcast or reprint elements of it. And we have had, major press statements and press conferences consistently over the 5 years, more than any of the other parties, with the exception of the 2 that are in Parliament, because obviously the 2 that are in Parliament have access to Parliament and other resources, prime ministers, press conferences, leader of the opposition press conferences. But we have consistently made statements and have been engaged in other kinds of activism. For example, solidarity with Palestine, now the issue of US-Venezuela organizing activities and so on. So we've been pretty consistent in different kinds of activities, not as much as we would like, but to the extent of our resources, we have been doing things. We do back-to-school drives and give out school bags at Christmas time coming. We do stuff. So there are things that as a political party we do, and we have internal meetings on a regular basis, not just at the leadership, but at our second rank level as well.
Okay, so David, I accept that about the MSJ, and I suppose it happens at varying degrees with the other parties. But I'm talking more about the notion of coming together to create a force that is left almost to the last 2-3 months before, and then of course the kind of arrangements that are made at that point in time you cannot hold. I remember the hope. One of the deputy political leaders drop out at the last moment, and confusion, and so that there's a lack of the ability to cohere amongst yourselves so that people could take you seriously. I take David's point about the MSJ and it's working and so on, but if the MSJ is against coming to coalition, that's fine. Nobody could force a political party to get together. But I'm saying that inevitably and almost always they come together at the last moment with no plan, no organization, no serious advent. So I am really saying that your parties really are a part of the cause, and I accept the ethnicity and the race and all of that. But your parties and your failure to organize yourselves properly, if you're going to cohere, has really been a major part of your inability to come together as a force.
Well, let me just say this, Tony. I say this as an observer and also as chairman of Hope, because in the last political season, Timothy and I, we worked not only on building Hope as a party, but on every Saturday morning we had a coming together of all these parties, and together. David came into 1 or 2 of those meetings, I think, so that we could agree on a vision for the country, so that we can agree on a way forward. And while it seems that you're getting there and you think that the people are coming together on a common goal, there's always been the detraction, because somebody from one of the other parties that would want to influence somebody else to come join with them. And if you look at what happened in the last election, you had a lot of the people that were coming together eventually going to join with the opposition to form what is now called a coalition of parties and so on. But it's very difficult for a small party to exist during a period when there's no election. The most basic thing is like an office space, telephone, somebody to be there, somebody to answer the phone and so on. Those most basic things, a computer, a desk, a chair, those things cost money. And we're talking about, on the average, just to survive, about maybe $20,000, $25,000 a month. And what do you get that from? Unless you have some other structure that you can utilize the facilities from somewhere else. Now, the two major parties don't have that problem because they have their own headquarters and base, and they have a large base of people who submit, who send money to them on a regular basis. And you, Tony, talked about business people. What is the attraction for any financier to say, let me spend, say, $100,000 or $200,000 or $1 million or $5 million on a small party if they believe that that party will not win the election because of the fact that these two major parties control so much of the election? And that is where the problem comes. You have a problem with resources. Where do you get the money to survive? I personally started my party, my own party, the Democratic Party of Trinidad and Tobago, and we would have spent a lot of money up to now. If you go on YouTube, you'll see there are over 20 vision for Trinidad and Tobago. So we spent a lot of money on production and then giving out this vision that is still there. But you need more than ideas. You need more than a vision for where we need to be. You need to have the sort of resources that can make that party attractive. And that's where the problem is. And I think the major part in terms of that would come from the financial resources to keep a party alive.
Gentlemen, don't wait for me to drag you in, jump in the conversation. Whoever.
Okay, I'd like to take a stab at this. I would have attended a couple of these coalition building type meetings prior to the last election. And while those meetings may have been very cordial and informative to some degree, you spoke about, Tony, about why we haven't been able to come together. And to me, the main reason, a couple reasons, the main one being different ideologies. Each party, I don't like the term small party, each party has a form of ideology. And you're asking, I think one of them, Timothy, you all had maybe 7, 8 different actors, if we want to call it that. And you are asking these people to come together under one umbrella and abandon, in a sense, their own belief system as to how this thing should be done. So that was the first issue for me. The second issue being egos. You have egos that you have to deal with. Different leaders of these different organizations obviously believe, in a sense, that they may be more suited for the role of leader of whatever this amalgam is. And therefore, getting the 6 or 7 different individuals to agree on what a leadership structure might look like if we were to all come under one umbrella, obviously had its difficulties as well. So it's not as simple, Mr. Fraser, as We take the 6 small parties and we sit together around a table and we join and we become one. It's a lot that has to be worked out. And in all fairness, I must say, Steve Alvarez, Timothy Hamel-Smith, etc., worked really hard on attempting to do something. And therefore, there was no lack of effort. We can't fault for effort. But the ability to just find that common ground and be able to do this just proved very difficult, in my opinion. In the end, it just proved very difficult.
Yeah. So I have identified two things from what you're saying. The first one is ideology. I don't know if I buy that because I don't know that there is any significant ideological differences between and amongst the parties. I know David will claim that his party is different in this regard, and maybe he has some point there. The second point, though, that I buy is the ego of certain individuals within the party. And Timothy Hamel-Smith knows about that. In the last, in what, is it 2 months or a week or whatever the time was, one of the deputy political leaders said that when the banner didn't show a name, I don't remember exactly what it was. Some kind of trivial something, and that was a cause to break away from the party. Following up on what Imran says, what do you say are some of the causes for the parties not being able to hold together at critical points in time?
You know, one of the things we did, Tony, when we tried to bring all these parties together was to set out a methodology for achieving it. Not just to find that you're coming to old talk, as it were, but we set out to step by step where we wanted to go. Part of that is, all right, let's look at our policy. Can we have commonality around a policy for housing or for the public service or whatever issue it might have been? And I thought my feeling at the time, and perhaps naively so, is that if we could get people to buy in to a policy, and you know, from my perspective, yes, we put something on the table, but I had absolutely no problem taking and integrating what other people had to say, or even if I thought the idea was better, to replace it. That certainly wasn't the problem. But I'm not sure that people were ready for the discipline, if you like, that takes. We had many long hours. I mean, to give up your Saturday, you know, basically for these type of meetings, religiously for quite a substantial period of time, it's a lot of a person's life, as it were. But I did think it was the right methodology. I still think so. You know, I don't think that we necessarily fell apart because of ideology. I don't, like yourself, I didn't think that, you know, we were worlds apart on that. But it did take, people had to take the opportunity to take away the plan, to study it, to come up with their own, you know, that is just by its very nature, that ought to have caused a group of people to gel around a policy, to say, all right, this what can represent whatever entity emerges. What I do agree, yes, you have parties who feel, well, it should be my name or whatever should be the party, and this one should be the party leader. And you do get those tensions, you can't avoid it. From our perspective, you know, as much as one, from our perspective, I appreciate that we've set up Hope there and we thought it had good dynamics in terms of marketing. You know, I don't think if push came to shove that we would say, hey, let's have something different. And we had come up with suggesting that there could be an umbrella organization, as it were, under which all of us, so that was a different approach as well that had been considered, because we understood the egos that might be driving certain positions. So if we could have kept all under one umbrella, there would have been perhaps, but as you say, at some point in time, people felt that they hadn't got sufficient, their position was not as fully displayed or whatever, whether the banner passed over in front of them, whatever it be, it's hard putting together a lot of different personalities, different backgrounds, people having their own personal agendas, as it were. Political parties aren't easy unless I don't know what happens in the UNC or PNM, but certainly you cannot imagine how difficult it is when you bring somebody who you think is aligned with you into the bosom of the party, and you assign them to X role or whatever, and then they feel, what, I want to keep for myself the whole party database. And refuse to share it or things like that. You can't imagine those kind of things which play into the dynamics of trying to form a political party.
Timothy, if I was still a newsman, I would say I got a story there from you. But rest easy, I am no longer a reporter. But I understand what you're saying. David, the MSJ, and correct me if I'm wrong, since the encounter of 2010, 2015, and well, not 15 because the party dropped out. Well, it was not a party, it's an formalized kind of party, if my memory serves me correctly, has not attempted, the important thing, has not attempted those kinds of alliances again, as far as I'm aware. Is it that you, the party, are not into these kinds of alliances anymore?
No, so for the record, we had three of our very senior leaders meet with Timothy and Steve and some of his colleagues, and we had a very open and frank discussion prior to the last election. I don't remember exactly the date, but it was quite some months before the last election, election of this year of 2025. So we must have met probably sometime in 2024, I think it would have been, and so on. And we had a very open discussion, and we indicated that in terms of hope as a specific party, and I'm not going to tell all the tales out of school, so Steve and Timothy don't have to get too anxious. But I can say that we said that with respect to hope, the persons in hope, we knew them, we had worked before, collaborated, we respected them, and we could work with them. But there were some other individuals / parties that we thought we could not necessarily be trusted in a process of bringing everybody together. And I think Timothy and Steve would remember that particular discussion. I don't need to name names because that just gets into back of that. I'm not into back of that. But also, several other factors. One that we had raised is that, of course, process is very important because if you don't have a good process, and it can't simply be at the level of the top leaders talking and then some announcement gets made and so on. That is not going to capture the trust or instill the trust and confidence, not just in your own members, but more generally in the public at large. Because the public at large, many of them are cynical about party politics, about politicians, about governance generally, and are cynical about and skeptical about people coming together. You said to get into office or whatever, but just people might see this as purely some people trying to come together to win office for whatever reason. And so you really have to take time and to build trust and confidence if you're having a process of collaboration with other political parties. So we're not opposed to to alliances necessarily. So yes, the MSJ, when we went into the People's Partnership in 2010, we had not yet established a political party. We had registered it as a political party, but we didn't have a constitution, we didn't have a structure. We were in the process of working on those things. But of course, Patrick Manning called the election early, and therefore we weren't prepared for that. So but we went into the partnership because we think we had done a whole lot of work politically, but it may be in our trade union capacities and otherwise in terms of campaigning or fighting against a lot of the policies of Manning. And so we went into that, and then in 2011, on I think it was the 14th of May 2011, we actually founded the MSA with our party congress, with our constitution and structures and so on. So we left in June of 2012. We left the partnership in June of 2012 as a party. And we have not gone into a coalition since then. We have contested every local government election since then on our own, but in a limited way, not right across the board. And when we talk about local elections and other political parties, we must never forget Jack Warner and the ILP, which contested the 2013 local government elections, if my memory serves me right, and got over 100,000 votes, but didn't win a seat. They got some aldermen based upon the PR system of electing aldermen, but they didn't win a single councillor seat. But they got over 100,000 votes. So that, but again, like what Imran said in terms of people breaking from the UNC, a lot of people in the COP of, not everyone, but a lot of people in the COP of 2007 broke with the UNC because they thought that Patrick Pandey and the UNC was not winnable again. And Jack Warner, the people who voted for him largely broke with the UNC. And he got others, but it was largely people who broke from the UNC. So again, but that was not a sustainable base. It evaporated. So by the general elections of 2020, Jack was a spent force electorally in that sense. He didn't win his own seat. Yeah.
Yeah,
2015 rather. Sorry,
yeah.
2015.
What some of what each one of you has said is that there is still a group of voters. You talk about Jack's party getting 100,000 plus votes. The same thing with the COP in its initial venture. Shows that there are people outside there who are willing to take a chance. But it has not worked for them in a consistent manner. I remember the NER. I really thought that at the point in time that was an explosive campaign, and there were lots of hope for people who were, wanting something else. And within 6 months to a year, the party fragmented. So I am saying that there is, everybody said at the start that, in terms of being able to win people over, to reach them, the funding that is required and so on. But on occasion, people have come forward and, voted for one party or the other, shows that they are willing to take a chance. But we come back to the whole thing that, what's the saying? The party doesn't last longer than the red horse fire when they come together. So the fragmentation continues. And we talked about individuality and so on. Is it that we are a political people, who, when Williams came in 56, he talked about discipline of the party and so on. And the ENM falls apart at a point in time, but they hold together like a lodge most of the time. Is it that we, the electorate I'm talking now about, are not capable of holding together with one of the political parties, or maybe we simply don't impress them?
I just wanted to raise an issue on that quickly in terms of a mathematical situation where, for example, in a local government election, we have been unable to carry that figure of participation up past 50%. And in a general election setting, we haven't been able to get it past maybe 70, 75% at best. It's normally in the 60s. If you have 28,000 possible voters in a constituency, and the PNM and the UNC around 8 to 10,000 each, and you have a figure that just simply doesn't vote, you are asking another party to be able to get up to that figure, which may result in a reduction for the other two of maybe 2 or 3,000. But numerically, it has proven very difficult. Jack was able to do it in Chaguanas West when he won the seat as an independent, well, under the ILP. But it's a very difficult formula to break when you're planning on winning a seat as a third party in that seat. And we spoke about the resources, we spoke about these things, but the electorate, especially in our local, we have a local government election coming up maybe in a year and a half or so. They are just not interested in coming out for a local. And while the number may suggest that it's winnable to win a local government seat or area, sometimes it could be won with 600 votes, 800 votes, a LG candidate might win with. But it has proven very difficult. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, so we're going to take a break now. Sorry, you wanted to say something immediately on that one, Steve?
Yeah, really quickly, Tony. I just want to talk about it, but we can come back after the break if the break is ever. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So we go to a break now and we come back. We are talking about the political parties, the small political parties. There is some objection to that, calling them small, the non-traditional parties. I won't argue about that. So we come back to the discussion in a moment. We have some of the leaders of those non-traditional parties with us, and they are going through the difficulties. I have a question for them. Maybe I should tell them now. Let them ruminate in their minds. So is it that Trinidad and Tobago is lost? We are going to be forever tied between the UNC and the PNM, whichever name they call themselves, into the future. When we come back, we're going to hear from you on that. Chalo.
All of them had silver tongue. They made you feel their effect was the best around. With promises of utopia and song, all because of
Wake up with the NETT Radio Breakfast Show. Rise and shine with Wendell Stevens and Richard Ragubarsi, weekdays from 6 o'clock to 9 a.m. Start your day feeling good, energized, and informed as we tackle the biggest issues of the day, get you where you need to be on time, and keep you in the know about everything that matters. We bring you insightful discussions, expert analysis, and the latest updates so you're always ahead of the curve. Mornings matter. Your voice matters. And it all starts right here on NewEra TT Radio, NETT Radio. The NETT Radio Breakfast Show, weekdays 6 to 9 a.m. Wake up informed and stay ahead.
S&H Rumbox, 137 Western Main Road, St. James, for all your retail and wholesale needs for alcohol and non-alcoholic beverages. Call us at 686-0599 or visit us at 137 Western Main Road, St. James. S&H Rumbox, drinking out of the box.
There's no Christmas like Christmas on NewEra TT Radio.
The other day, I went Venezuela, and I fall in love with a señorita. I hardly know the lingo, but I really know what she know.
It's a time for giving, caring, and sharing.
It's things like this that get me mad. Who stole the rubbish from my yard?
A time for loving and remembering what really matters most. Greater than from our family to yours. Merry Christmas and a blessed season from New Era TT Radio. NETT Radio.
All right, and of course, we are wishing everybody a Merry Christmas. And remember, you can advertise with us here for the Christmas season on New Era TT Radio. Give us a call, 299-5158. Or, just check with us, 281-1315. And we will be happy to do some advertising for you. Of course, it is New Era TT Radio. As we welcome you back to the DriveTime Exchange. Very interesting discussions taking place this afternoon. Tony, it's back to you.
And Chalo, you missed out your favorite line in your approach to the request for advertisement. Go ahead and give it, man.
No, but that's what I'm saying. Yeah, so we welcome your advertisement, and as Max said,
your Max House line.
Yes, Max says we need the money. We are in a position just like the small parties as they talk about, to maintain ourselves. It's not an easy thing.
Sorry. Go ahead, Chalo.
No, that was it. So help us out. Do some advertising.
Wonderful. All right. So we are talking with the non-traditional parties, the traditional parties, the small parties, however you deem them, those parties which have not been able to disrupt the 60-year-old, 70-year-old practice of the two major parties exchanging. Well, it went for some period of time before there was any exchange between government and opposition. And over the years, there have been a couple of changes, a couple of coalition forces which have come into office. And we are talking with the leaders of four of those parties. David Abdullah, Movement for Social Justice. We're talking about Imran Ali, Congress of the People. Steve Alvarez, the Democratic Party of Trinidad and Tobago, and Timothy Hamel-Smith, the Party of Hope, the party which hopes or gives out the possibility of hope to break out of this iron fist into which the two parties have held the population. So, gentlemen, I promoted the question is, if there are all of these blockades to the possibility of the small parties, either individual or collectively, getting together to shift the two major parties. And just let me spend 30 seconds on this. There is sufficient reason that has been given by the two major parties. When the PNM in office, it says that the UNC is corrupt and is unable to function, and vice versa. So that both of them have said that they have not been able to govern the country in the ways that the country deserves to be governed. So all of that is happening. And yet, we have not been able to get a third force to come between those two parties. Want to respond, gentlemen?
All right, Tony, let me tell you about a small story, since you know.
Sorry, just before you go on, just my fault. Just to identify that Steve Alvarez is the person who is speaking now.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yes, Tony. So during the last election, there was someone I knew who was campaigning for one of the two major political parties. And he said he felt that he had the support of most of the young people in a certain area in St. Joseph. And one afternoon, he said to me that he was coming down the hill, and there was over 100 young men with jerseys from the other major party. And he was asking them, so why, how come you guys just shift like that, from us to them? And they were saying, well, apart from the jerseys, we got a lot of cash in the jerseys. So there's that aspect. Whether it's true or not, I can't say. There's the aspect of people funding activists on the ground. David spoke about the cost of busing people to a major political meeting and so on. You would recall that at one time, I think it was when you had the COP contesting, having a meeting in Woodford Square, and the other major parties. One was in Aranguez, and I think the other one was in Tunapuna. That they ran out of maxis because people had already purchased, all these maxis to bus people to their political meetings. That is a cost. So when you look at the reality, where does a small party, find the money to pay activists, to pay people to canvass, to put up all these big stages and television screens and so on? It's a business that costs millions of dollars, and unfortunately, Tony, I think you spoke about whether that we are doomed to live with these two major parties for the long term. I would want to think that unless something happens socially that causes us to see that the solution for our country cannot come from race-based parties, but from people uniting in the best interest of our country. Until we get to something that makes us recognize that we have to look at the red, white, and black and not the red and the yellow, until something within us cause us to look in that direction, we are unfortunately going to be stuck with these two major parties, because I don't see any small or alternate party finding the millions of dollars that is required and is necessary to compete on that level. So the only solution would be to compete on an ideological level, on a social level that allows people to look at country first. And that is a difficult thing to happen when you have enticements of government jobs and government contracts and so on. So it's fighting an uphill battle. And I hope that when people like Timothy and myself and David and Imran come out and we say like we want to make a change, I have tremendous respect for the individuals that do that, but it's not that we are unaware of the humongous.
Timothy Hamel-Smith, I ask you the question: are we doomed? Have you left? I mean, all of the parties, the minor parties. Have you left the country to the PNM, UNC, till a dead fate into the future?
Yeah, and I hear from you, Tony. Beyond that, you're saying, there are people out there who like to see a difference, a third party come into the equation. One of the things and I think we have a structural problem. One of the things you have to recognize is that you have two gatekeepers in the form of the PNM and the UNC. And they have locked us into this position that they don't want altered because it works for them. If not this year, next 5 years or whatever, and from their perspective, there is a very grave danger of allowing a third party to come into the equation because you're happy with what there is. So when I say it's structural, one of the things, if you look back, 1956, 1962, choose which year you want. If you looked at the number of persons in a constituency back then, it ranged around 12,000. And if we had maintained 12,000 as the optimum number for a constituency, then the constituencies would have multiplied. So you would therefore have doubled the constituencies. Instead of 41, we'll have 83, for instance, by way of example. And when you do that, now you start have opportunities for voices to be heard from a different segment of society, because you've taken up what is now a constituency and perhaps gathered it around people who have a certain view as to what the politics ought to be, and they're not swamped out by the the other ethnic party or whatever that you have. So you have this structural problem, and these gatekeepers in whose interest it is to have it maintained. There is more than that. If you had 83 constituencies, then in fact you would really have. Because truth be told, we're supposed to have a difference between the executive and the legislative and the judiciary. Those are the three arms of government that are supposed to be separate. But the way we're structured, the executive and the legislative is one and the same. Whatever the executive want will be passed in parliament because they have a built-in majority. If, on the other hand, you had moved to 83 people in parliament, then you're much more likely to have the legislative standing on its own as an oversight body on the executive. But that just doesn't happen. And of course, then you need to limit cabinet because they will increase the cabinet to 40 people, whatever it takes, in order to keep people in line.
So, Timothy, if I can be cynical, and Timothy and David and everybody else, Imran, Steve, if I could be cynical, I haven't heard, ideas from all of the parties. I mean, not that there aren't and there have not been statements like you've made there over a period of time, but statements that can move the electorate to something that is different, and perhaps if that happens, you light a match somewhere, and it can end up in a big fire someplace. So I am saying essentially that perhaps meaning all of the parties, need to come up with something that can grab people. Tell us that, point out to us, argue seriously. Is election campaign, I have covered so many of them, is just bacchanal and confusion. Who say what this day, next day is who go bust who face and stupidness and so on. So I'm charging you all, David, Abdullah, for coming up with something that could really attract people.
Yeah, sure. So let me just back up 1 minute and say that one of the major issues that has to be confronted, quite apart from constitutional reform, and I agree 100% with Timothy on that, not necessarily in terms of the specifics, but that we need fundamental constitutional reform. But the other one is campaign and party finance legislation to regulate that. And there was a bill before the Parliament. It's Representation of the People Amendment Bill number 2 of 2020. And we submitted a very detailed memorandum early in 2021 as requested by the Joint Select Committee of Parliament. But that bill just lapsed because, and Timothy is right, neither the PNM nor the UNC want any change in how parties are financed. The Prime Minister heard us say that the PNM is supported by some mafia and whatever.
Drug dealers.
And drug dealers. But she wouldn't disclose where they got all that money from. And the UNC outspent the PNM by plenty in the last elections. So where did they get all the money from? And they wouldn't disclose that either. So that is a very important thing, because one of the problems that we can, if it hasn't already arisen, is that we could become a narco state where big money that is criminal captures the power of the state via financing one or both of the parties. That is something that we have to pay attention to. So that's also one issue. But coming back to your question, yes, the issue of messaging is absolutely important. And I'm sure that Timothy has done it as well as we have. We didn't have the money to pay for it, but we had friends who would try to give us advice on marketing and branding and so on, to try to come up with a message that captures people's imagination. But even if you come up with a catchy slogan, really, in my view, it comes back to the last election. I think, what was the voter turnout? 52%, was it? Below 50%, was the lowest since the no vote campaign of 1971. So a very large number of people were not persuaded to vote for either of the two parties, in spite of all of the money, in spite of all of the things that were supposed to be the consequences of the outcome of the election. And therefore, there are lots of people who do not support either, or who will support one, holding their nose and voting for them, even though they know that's not necessarily the solution, but they want to get the one who is there in government out so some of the people vote them out or whatever it is. So how do we capture their trust and confidence? And how do they see us? Nobody has said this as yet. How do they see us, and Tony may have alluded to it, as being electable, that we could actually win an election? Now, I'll give you in 2020, when I contested Point Affair seat, we chose that carefully because there were a lot of former Petrotrin workers, either retrenched or retired workers and so on. There were other workers from other industries that were represented by the OBQ, who I represented over decades, right? So they knew me as I walked around and so on. But in the last week of the campaign, the feedback was coming that both parties were saying, don't split the vote. Don't split the vote. Don't vote MSJ, because if you vote MSJ, then your real quote-unquote enemy, which is your quote-unquote ethnic enemy in that sense, will win the election. And that prompted me, I had to run, I voiced an ad, one of my campaign people went in and I voiced an ad in a little studio and so on, which we put circulating on a music truck right throughout the constituency for several days, saying, this issue of splitting the vote, ignore that. What you have to do is the right thing, and the right thing to do is to vote MSJ for XYZ reason. So there's also that factor that when the parties are faced with that kind of thing, they also try to circle the wagons. So how do you present yourself as being electable, which means that you have to generate momentum long before an election? In other words, you have to almost be seen that you are going to win even before the election bell is rung. And I come back to what I've shared with my colleagues in MSG, and I probably shared it with Timothy and Steve when we met, and that is that all the major changes in the country have happened as a result of some kind of mass mobilization and some kind of mass movement. When the ULF in '76 replaced the DLPs, there were two DLPs at the time, replaced the DLPs, it was on the back of the 1974 and 75 oil and sugar strikes and protest movements, and the coming together of workers and farmers in Skinner Park on the 18th of February 1975, that mass gathering, and then of course Bloody Tuesday on the 18th of March 1975. So you had that build up, and similarly there was a huge build up to 86 and so on. And people might remember, but I remember we trade unions, we organized a huge march and a rally in Woodford Square in 85, and we almost filled Woodford Square around issues of how workers' lives are being affected by structural adjustment and so on. So you get these mass movements which catapult political change, whether it was in 1937 and 1970 or whatever it was. And it is that what I describe as where we needed a revolution of the mind, and that moment will come. So I am not without hope, and hope not in the sense of the acronym of Timothy and Steve's party, but I'm not without hope that change will come. How it will come, we are never certain, but what we have to do is do the hard work now of laying the foundation. And it may not be in my generation or Timothy's or your, Tony or Steve. It may come in another generation, but that work has to be done to bring about fundamental change. And I do think that people are changing their thinking, but they haven't yet broken free to say we can go with a different approach to politics and reject the red and the yellow.
Yeah. Imran seems to have disappeared. Imran is clearly from a different generation to the rest of us, so maybe he has greater hope. Imran, you're still there or you've gone?
No, he's there. He just fell out.
All right. Okay,
Tony, can I ask a question?
Sure.
I just want to piggyback off of what you were saying to the gentleman there, because I was thinking that in listening to the discussion also, the message has not been able to resonate with the small parties or the smaller parties that is national, that everybody is interested in it. So yes, it may have an issue, but some interested in it and some not interested in it because my party will take care of that and take care of me. And I am also wondering if the structure of our elections and how we put a party, the amount of seats you have to get and all those different kinds of things. If all of these things are set up in a way to keep small parties out, and why I'm saying that is because a lot of the parties may have one or two, maybe good individuals, but for them to feed 22 to get over that hurdle, strong individuals that could make that difference, they are not able to do that. And so I like David, I like Mr. Hamel-Smith, but who else behind him? I have that kind of confidence in the other people. Is the system set up in a way that keeps the smaller parties outside?
And when you say the system, which system you're talking about?
The way how the electoral system as it is set up right now, you have to get a certain amount of seats to be able to form government and all those. Is all that set up to keep small parties out?
Yeah,
any responses?
Yeah, a quick response, and then the others I'm sure will come in. I remember the late Professor John Spence used to write a column in one of the newspapers. And I mean, he used to talk to me individually because his wife, both of them of course passed away, but his wife is actually a second cousin of my dad. So the family goes back a long way. And John used to say to me, David, you have to show, this was after we broke with the partnership in 2012, you have to show a shadow cabinet, and he was insistent upon that. And I mean, that's been a discussion we've had internally with MSG, I could say that. But I'll tell you one of the things that the societies, I want to come back to Sir Charles' question, is not just the electoral system, but there is a sense of fear and victimization that if you align yourself with a particular party, then you might not get a contract as a consultant, or if you are already in the system, you're not going to get a promotion, and so on and so on. There's a lot of fear and a lot of victimization because when parties are in government, there's a lot of that kind of intimidation that goes on, and so people shy away. So you almost have to show that you're about to win, and then they will jump on the bandwagon. By which time, of course, it's too late because you needed them before to demonstrate that. And so that is one of the things that you have to build out beforehand. I don't know what the experience of Steve and Timothy is in that regard.
Well, I think that, he is hitting the point. That's where I started. There's a structural problem we have, and proportional representation would in fact overcome that problem. Until that occurs, there is no space, no electoral space for other voices other than from the two traditional parties to emerge.
And Timothy Hamel-Smith, I would say is that the ball is in your court, meaning in the other party's court, to make that breakthrough, to persuade the electorate that there is value in listening to another voice outside of the two voices.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Tony. In fact, I've been approached just recently to start on a place where people can recognize that Trinidad and Tobago, we're in a very difficult pace. The next 5 years will determine whether or not Trinidad can climb out of the doldrums. I mean, yes, you can always hope that Lady Luck will be with us and we have lots of oil and gas. That's our answer. But that just means that we continue to
push the development program a little bit further down the road.
But there's a lot of change that is required in terms of the economy, so that people have an opportunity to succeed and to prosper, and not just a narrow group of people, but spread throughout the country. The problem we have is that, of course, I suppose in many countries, 1% are the top super wealthy. We don't have a big enough middle class, and more people are dropping out of that middle class and falling into the lower income levels, which makes life even more difficult unless within the next 5 years we find a transition. So yes, in fact, what usually when you mention proportional representation, the first reaction is that will never happen because you require a special majority. But in fact, we have proposals to demonstrate that is wrong. You could achieve proportional representation tomorrow if, in fact, the party that had the majority voted, a simple majority, could bring in proportional representation. But there are other things that you need besides proportional representation. We need fiscal responsibility legislation, because you need guardrails. Each government, when a government gets into power in Trinidad, they think they have free rein, do as I please, as it were, because they can't stop me. I have the votes and I have the majority in Parliament. That's all that counts.
All right,
And
just to inform our listeners and viewers that we are really talking about the possibility of another party, a third party outside of the PNM and the UNC emerging to move the country forward. And I don't think there is anyone outside there who could feel, whether you're a loyal supporter or an ethnic supporter, tribal supporter, can feel really comfortable or happy that the country has achieved all that it could have achieved given the resources that we've had over a long period of time, including human resources and so on. Let me give you gentlemen an opportunity to take some pot shots at the media. Have the media assisted, not assisted, been in the way, been biased of not promoting the voices and the messages of the traditional non-large, I don't know how to say this thing, small parties?
Well, let me start by saying, I think it.
And this is Steve Alvarez talking now.
I can't recall whether it was David or Timothy that said that a lot of people fear victimization. I think David was saying that, and that victimization is real. And this is where we have the problem. The professionals, the people who are supposed to take us forward, the people who we know has the intelligence and the ability and the management skills, they are very comfortable in their jobs. And they are so afraid of even poking their head out, because the minute you do that, you there's a possibility of victimization. It has gotten to the point now, I hope I'm wrong, but I have been reading today that people on social media who comment negatively against the government can find themselves being in a position where they may not be able to travel to the United States and so on, because there are recommendations that their visa should be revoked. I hope it's not true, but that's one of the things that you see coming about. So again, that fear among people to speak, just to say, so people more or less and these are the people who can make the difference. And when we talk about, so where is that shadow cabinet? Where is that people with the level of management skills and so on? They're there, but they're afraid to show face.
Yeah. What of the media? Have the media assisted or not assisted? Have the media been biased towards the big parties, the small parties?
The media has gotten a sense of comfort with either or, because they too are looking to survive economically in terms of advertisements and so on and so on. So they too are threading this narrow road as to decide which party do I support. And this is not just Trinidad and Tobago. You see that happening internationally as well, that the media seem to have taken a road lately of choosing a side rather than being objective and giving us both sides of the story.
Imran Ali, are you still there? Have the media helped or hindered the smaller parties and there are different elements of the media. The element of the media that you have to pay for the advertisements. That has nothing to do with the newsroom. We're talking about, professional reporting and so on, even reporting on some of the small parties. Imran?
Tony. Oh, sorry. Is Imran there?
Imran seems not to be there. Go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, well, I know Steve.
No, he left.
I know Steve gets his letters to the editor published very often. So that is one thing. So I suppose he can't complain too much in terms of his letters to the editor not getting published. In terms of MSJ, we have not had a bad experience. We like to say that in terms of the traditional media, we'll probably run third in terms of the political parties that get covered by the media, in terms of either reporting on our Tuesday talks or press conferences or press statements. Sometimes we get zero coverage on something important which we think is important, and other times we get decent coverage, not necessarily by every single media house, but it might be in two or three. So we are, I wouldn't complain necessarily about the media. As I said, sometimes we get zero, sometimes we get really good, sometimes it's in between. But also it's partly the media cycle. So, I mean, if we have a press conference on a Sunday morning and the media on a Sunday, they have one reporter, right, working for the newspaper on that day and one for television and so on. So if there's a double murder somewhere, or something like that, you're going to get bumped off of that news cycle, and we have no control over that. So there's an issue about the media's own resources in terms of how much do they allocate to cover, different stories and different reports. But the other thing is, and I talk about social media because there's social media. Some people are very effective in that. Now Minister Philip Alexander, he had his own party, but he was very effective in social media. We were not nearly there as MSJ, and it's something that we have talked about. But you really need to have, coming back to Steve's point, you really need to have one or two dedicated people to work that social media to get it to where you need to get, and to edit your content into small reels to be accessible for young people and so on. So social media is important. The other point I wanted to make about the traditional media. I lost that point. So generally speaking, it's been, it's not been bad. Right. I remember the late Lennox Oscar Pear, one of my mentors. Timothy, you might remember that name. He was an attorney at law, one of the outstanding people in culture. Tony, you should know this because Lennox was one of the people who started TASPO, the first TASPO, and the first Steelman organization, and so much more. But Lennox always used to tell us, and this was way back when, right? He used to say, dog bites man, no news. Man bites dog, that is news. I don't know if you learned that in journalism school.
Yeah, sure.
But so sometimes you have to create the way in which you want to get your news across. So like if we were launching a petition campaign against the TNTech rate increase, we didn't have it in a room. We went outside the Ministry of Public Utilities and had it there, or you go outside the U.S. Embassy to have a press conference about U.S. military deployment in the Caribbean. Whereas if you had it in a hall somewhere, you might not get coverage. So you also have to find creative ways and means of enabling or facilitating the media to give you the kind of coverage that they think will either make a headline or make a soundbite or give them an image that is saleable for their audience. So you need to be media savvy as well. You need to be media savvy.
Yeah, and there is a contention or system that is operated in some countries that outside of paying for airtime and so on, is that the government of the day, in its own media, creates the space for the small parties to be heard. When I joined TTT back in the 80s, there was something of a policy that Jones Madeira had in place, and incidentally, we also repeated it again under Jones at Radio Trinidad in the 1980s, that there was a certain kind of allocation of time and so on for all of the parties. Of course, the big parties got the most time. I remember we fell out with NJAC seriously in that period because NJAC felt that they were the second party, not the third, the second party in the country, the oldest party, the party with the biggest support base, and they did not get the kind of access to. I'm talking about free. I'm not talking about news coverage now. I'm talking about free television time, radio time, and so on. So in some countries, aware that the smaller parties do not have the kind of access to the media as others, there is an open space for them to get a share of the coverage.
Yeah, and that there are regulations for that in the proposed legislation for campaign
party
and
financing.
finance. Yeah,
and that's a place to have it, Tony. You need in the party financing legislation to even the playing field, as it were. You allow for this equal time on government stations. When you get back to two things, the public media, really, you have to understand what sells. Bacchanal sells. If I put a policy out there, that doesn't sell. So they want to, regardless of whether they want it to be pro party A or party B, they also want the material to have, blood, as it were. Blood spills, that is a story. And therefore you need that sort of bacchanalia within it. So for instance,
and Timothy, I feel to throw back at you that is really supported by the advertising community. They want the bacchanal. They want to attract the audience, and they put their money in those things.
Marketing. They know marketing. That's what captures people. But you are. First of all, you need to look at in an electoral cycle. You will find that the media earn a huge hunk of money. So their profits that they make in election years are enormous. So you say, well, do they give you coverage, as it were? Yes, but not to an extent that will dent, if you like, the two traditional parties, because that's where I'm getting the real advertisements from. Yeah. That's a real source of money. Mm-hmm. And money talks and everything else walks.
There was a shift.
There was a shift.
I can tell you from my own experience, there was a shift in all of that. In the 80s, both radio and television in which I worked, Radio Trinidad and TGT, the newsrooms called the shots on, say, coverage of the political rallies of the parties and so on. We would go out and get the advertising. Well, not we, but the advertising department would go out and get the advertising. And we in the newsroom would organize coverage of political meetings in a professional kind of way. We had all kinds of commentators to come and analyze the parties and their programs and all of that. And then, when was it? The 1991 campaign, I think, if I remember correctly, after the NER lost, the UNC then led in terms of the advertising business by Sadiq Bash. And I became the news director at that point in time. And when I attempted to follow the pattern that we had developed, the advertising department said, Tony Fraser, you could talk that foolishness, but we have to get dollars and cents. And therefore, all the professional coverage of the meetings that we attempted before, that went through completely. And the parties now have taken over the television and radio stations because they have the money.
That is a reality you have to face. And hence more reason we need, we need party financing regulation that incorporates the question of fair media, as it were, fair media coverage, And on the other hand, so yes, you might say that free social media, but it's not so free as it used to be, but is available to us. But notice what works there. David referred to Philip Alexander. Yes, he trod a path there that captured people, but it's really Bacchanal he was promoting. And the more Bacchanal you promote, the more you get followers. Some people could go with that. I find that very hard to
And the man has called himself, not me calling him that, the man has called himself a political prostitute.
Yeah, and as we're talking anecdotally, Tony, before you at TDT and so on, there was the infamous Mr. Jimmy Bain. And there was a major struggle that the OWTU had against Texaco for pension reform. This would have been 1978, 79. And coming out of the 74, 75 campaign of the worker struggles and then ULF winning, Bain had a policy that the voices of all the ULF leaders, Rafiq Shah, George Weeks, Mazio Pandey, would not appear on TTT, right? And except I suppose if they were in Parliament or something like that.
And 610 radio, because he was also
radio
of 610.
That's right. And so Jai Pasram was doing a story about the pension issue. And he was going to interview George Weeks, and as President General, George could not be interviewed because of this ban. Aaron McLeod was by then a member of Parliament for the ULF, and he got banned. He was the president of the Point-of-Care branch of the union at the time. And so I became the spokesperson for the union on that television interview as head of the Education Research Department. And that was really my first entree to television or national television that way. And it was quite accidental because of Jimmy Bain's ban. The reporting afterwards was quite favorable to me in terms of how I articulated the union's case, but that's not the point. I was making the point that there was a previous ban, and you're now hearing statements coming out of this government which are concerning about the issue of free speech and so on. And I think this is something, and another discussion ought to be taken up, because once you begin to go down a certain road, the question is, where do you end up?
Reporting your own nationals to a foreign government, that's a very serious matter, to get them deported, their visas removed. That's a very serious matter. That is not coming from outside, that's coming from inside.
Agreed.
That's another question. Gentlemen, we have some time left, and let me share it amongst you. Where do we go from here? We understand all of the difficulties that the small parties go through. We understand that it is more than simply the popularity of the two parties, but that each of the two major parties each one is steeped in political geography, political ethnicity, and so on, and it makes it very difficult to break out. But I continue to say that there is, not me to say, but rather by the evidence shows that there is an electorate outside of that. Even if you consider the 150,000 PNM people who did not vote in the last election compared to 2015, there are possibilities outside there. So where do you go from here?
Well, let me start by saying that
Steve Alvarez is starting. Yeah, go ahead.
That Trinidad and Tobago for the last, I would say, 30, 40 years has struggled to reach anywhere close to its real potential. We talk about things that ought to happen, but we cannot do. Simple things like the processing of information at immigration department. Simple things like a license plate for a vehicle that you still have people painting on numbers on a piece of tin and place it on their car, and that's legal. You fight with the beat-up dump there that's been there for decades opposite a housing development, with no regard for the stench and whatever negative effect it have on the people. So these are not UNC or PNM issues that came up over the last 5 or 10 years. We're talking about issues that needs to be looked at, that has been plaguing us for decades. We continue now. It's almost laughable that we continue to try to pump water into everybody's houses when everywhere else the acceptable standard is to use gravity. So these are issues that affect our country, and how do we deal? We cannot get out of that because we're so stuck into the sort of ethnic support for the two major parties, and that it makes us put our hands up in the air and think about what does tomorrow look like. So I want to say that I know Tim just talked about people reaching out to him and saying, you should do this or you should do that. I don't think we can give up. There was a time when Tim and I had discussions and we say, Steve, we've done all that we could, we've done our best, and let's leave it to somebody else to do whatever they can, because these young people might hopefully come up and make the change that is required. I don't know. As long as there's life within us, as long as there's that energy to make Trinidad and Tobago a better place, I think we have to continue to try. This is why I write. I write every week with the hope that somebody somewhere would read something and say, this makes sense. I want to say, yes, David, the media have been good to me in that they have been publishing my letters, which is good. And I hope that one day we will get out of this ethnic two-party red and yellow system and look at Trinidad and Tobago, red, white, and black, and have a better country for all of us.
Steve Alvarez, thank you very much. David Abdullah.
Yeah, I've told my colleagues in MSJ that what MSJ is trying to do as a left progressive party, if you wish, is something that nobody else in the Caribbean has done. After the Grenada Revolution, just very quickly, virtually all of the other left progressive organizations either dissipated, completely gave up because they were too close to align with Bernard Cord, or some of them then went into the traditional Labour parties. Ralph and they joined up with the old St. Vincent Labour Party to form the Unity Labour Party. Kenny Anthony and others went into the old St. Lucia Labour Party, similarly with Rosie Douglas in Dominica and that kind of thing. But we have not had a traditional Labour Party in Trinidad. We don't have the time to go into why, and so on. It goes back to what Brinsley Samu had talked about in terms of the colonial agenda. So therefore, we made that attempt with the partnership in 2010 that did not work out. And one of my regrets of the partnership was not what the UNC was doing necessarily, but the fact that the COP did not decide to break the same time we did. Because I do believe that if the COP and the MSJ left the partnership at the same time, that would have created a completely new dynamic in the politics of Trinidad and Tobago. And we could have swept elections going forward. But that's just my view, and that was one of my regrets of that period. But we are still there. We are the only party that has survived from 2012 to now. What's that? 13 years without a single position in the state apparatus. No local government, no MP or anything like that. And we have survived. So without any state resources or anything like that, we have survived, and we continue to survive because I think of what we stand for, social justice, what we believe in, and that what we articulate is relevant to many people. And our challenge now, which I'm not going to share publicly, but we have identified a way forward. Can we implement it? Because one of our problems actually is implementation, and that comes back to resources. A path forward that will build a political base that is not linked to ethnicity or anything else like that. That's our challenge, and we will see what happens in the next year or two.
All right. Thank you, David Abdullah. Timothy Hamel-Smith. I think your colleagues have taken a little bit of your time, but go ahead, nevertheless.
No, I can wrap up easily. What I've decided to do is to take a different path altogether. So, in fact, a think tank has been formed, an independent think tank, independent of Hope. Hope will continue to remain and continue to be a vehicle for electoral politics. But speaking for myself, Nova Policy and Development Lab has been formed, and we've been developing policy on specific issues that don't have a political tinge, I would like to think, to it. So we've developed policies on foreign exchange. We've developed policies on the economy. We've developed policies on fiscal responsibility, on the Constitution, on various areas which are I would like to say, neutral to the politics, in the hope, if you like, you can't be without hope. Or anything word you say, hope comes out. But in the hope that the political parties, the government of the day, will see wisdom in not necessarily taking wholesale what we had said. We don't pretend that we know everything, but we do believe that what we've put forward is something that can be adopted, reframed, edited to do something that would really change the trajectory of Trinidad and Tobago.
All right, Timothy Hamel-Smith, I can, and all of the other political parties who have been part of this discussion and those outside of the discussion, is that we remain here open to listen, because we too believe that there has to be serious change in the country going forward. So, Sir Charles, I think you can tell them about the rerun of the program, and just let me tell our viewers and listeners that tomorrow we pay tribute to a colleague of ours in the media who passed over the weekend, Danielle DeFintala, and we talk about her work. I remember Danielle being, she must have been 18 or 19 in the newsroom, the TTT newsroom, when I joined in the 80s, and then she disappeared and came back and did a hell of a lot of work in terms of production. We're going to talk, we have some of her colleagues who know her very well and who are going to talk to us about her tomorrow. Thank you, folks, and
thank you for having us,
Tony.
Thank you.
All the best.
Okay. Take care, guys.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen, for being on the program. And of course, this is where we put in a cap on it for today, the Drive Time Exchange. Of course, we run tomorrow morning just at around 8:20, 8:25 in that space, right here on NewEraTTRadio.com.
Thank you.
It was party time once again across the land. Anyway you pass, people they got out of hand. When DJ George